NWP Radio.
You're listening to NWP Radio, a production of the National Writing Project.
NWP. NWP Radio.
So, hello viewers. We're just a couple days away from November 1st, and so many of you in the National Writing Project know that that is a very special day because it's the start of NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month. So many of you were already bought in, but you know, we have also heard from people this year in particular who have said, you know, with everything going on this year, with emergency remote instruction, with hybrid learning, maybe this is actually the year that I'm going to take the jump and do NaNoWriMo with my young people. And so we wanted to bring you some resources and some ideas for you to get started if you think that you'd like to do NaNoWriMo. I've got two people here who are going to talk to you today. On the screen, you're going to see Marya Brennan. Hi, Marya. Marya is the program director at NaNoWriMo, and also Sean Krazit, who is a high school teacher at Albany High School, who's been doing NaNoWriMo now for about 4 years. And between the two of them, they're going to get you started so you can take advantage of NaNoWriMo this year, whether you're in classrooms with your kids or whether you're at home. So now, Marya, I want to start with you because I think a lot of folks in the National Writing Project do have a sense of NaNoWriMo, but there may be some viewers to whom this is new. And so would you take us through what is NaNoWriMo and why should I be excited to try and do it?
I can absolutely do that. I have a little presentation I would love to share with you. So I'm going to share my screen now. So, National Novel Writing Month and the Young Writers Program, what the heck is it? I can tell you. So first I'm setting the mood. For me, this picture kind of sums up NaNoWriMo. It's a picture of a middle school classroom in Alameda at the end of NaNoWriMo. So we'll just say hello to them. So NaNoWriMo is like the big parent org. So we're an organization that provides the tools, resources, community to help people reach creative writing goals. We do stuff all year. But our big main event is National Novel Writing Month, where in the month of November, people all around the world, usually around 400,000 people every year, try to write the first draft of a novel in just 30 days. For the adult program, that's 1,667 words per day. And in order to do that, you can't worry about, am I a writer? Should I be doing this? Like, you just have to write. It's not about getting the right words out. It's about getting the words out, which is actually kind of how real authors work. They write. They don't worry about those terrible first drafts. That's just a part of writing a novel, is a terrible first draft. So the Young Writers Program takes that same kind of philosophy and energy of determination and enthusiasm and valuing quantity over quality and helps young people do it. So it actually started really organically, where teachers who had done NaNoWriMo were like, I love this. This is an extremely meaningful experience, and I want to share this with my students. And so we noticed them starting to, trying to adapt our program to their students. And we thought, we can help with that. And so now we have this whole huge program called the Young Writers Program. And I gave that 400,000 number earlier. About 100,000 of those people are young writers and educators, both in classrooms, but also a lot of young people participate outside of the classroom too. And they try to write novels with us in November as well. And novels maybe look a little different for like a first grader than a 7th grader, than a 12th grader, than an 80-year-old person. So in the Young Writers Program, we provide a lot of resources, but we also allow them to set their own individualized word count goals, which is, I think, one of the best things about it. When I did this with my 7th graders, the highest goal is 11,000 words, and that was the most she had ever written in that month. And the lowest goal, I think, was around 1,000 words, and that was the most that student had ever written in a month. And since we track progress to goal, and it values, just like persistence and words rather than, the quality of your words, it was really accessible for each of those students, and they both got to feel super successful. So I mentioned resources. We have a bunch of stuff. I'm just going to touch on it now. You can explore the Young Writers Program. It's 100% free. When I was a teacher, I was like, is it free? Like anytime someone mentions something. So it is free. We have a website. You can check it out. We have a bunch of teaching resources like Common Core aligned curriculum for all grade levels, young novelist workbooks with super kid-friendly activities, classroom kits. We send out physical ones every fall, but we also have a bunch of digital ones with different resources. I remember when I was teaching, like, you can spend hours and hours making stuff like this. And so we just wanted to kind of provide as much as we could, knowing that people will edit it because they know their students better than we do. Our online writing space, again, there's lots of goal tracking charts. Your students can type their novels on our site, but they can also type them in a Google Doc and just update their word count manually. Either way, they'll get progress updates towards their goal. I'm at 25%, I'm at 50%. You can cycle through different goal tracking tools. That's my favorite part, because it gives you kind of immediate feedback on how you're doing in a way that students don't always get because you're just one person. There's a classroom chat tool. You can talk to your students. I love this, there's an admin panel where you can track a narrow view of your students, or you can expand it out and see, like, if I wanted to look at Kristen Sibold, who was my intern like several years ago, and I keep using her in this presentation, but you can see like exactly how many words she wrote each day. You could read her novel if you wanted to read it. I can click through and read it. I can change her goal. I can celebrate her success. So good job, Kristen. There's lots of other things. It's COPA compliant. It's easy to sign up. We've got a lot of resources. That's just kind of like the big picture view of what we offer. And I know that we're going to dive into more details, and these are things you can also explore on your own later. So I think I'm going to go ahead and stop there. Those are the basics. Elisa, maybe I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, let's take you off screen sharing and we'll all be together here. That's fabulous, Mariah. Thank you. And I think everybody could see from what you were sharing that one of the reasons why we thought this would be a wonderful thing for people to think about now during the pandemic, where so many people are in a remote situation, is that this stuff is available online, can be done online, the resources are online, and the kind of crazy interest-driven insanity of write a novel about anything, whatever you're interested in, just keep writing and keep writing. What a great thing for asynchronous time, because it's so deeply interest-driven by the writers. So I think you gave us a picture of that, but I know because we've been pitching NaNoWriMo in the NWP for a very long time, and if you haven't done it, it's almost hard to imagine what it would be like to do it. And so I think we're going to kick over to Sean and your 4 years of experience. Like, give us a picture of NaNoWriMo in action.
Yeah, so NaNoWriMo is one of the highlights of my year every year. I always really look forward to it. And my students always report that it's, one of their favorite experiences from the year as well. And so what it usually looks like in my classes, we'll spend the last 2 weeks of October preparing. And so that will start off with just brainstorming some really basic ideas that they might want to write about, like soccer or dance or, aliens or something like that, right? And then we'll talk about, okay, how do you take that idea and turn it into a premise, right? You give it a specific character, you give it a conflict. All right, now we got a story cooking. And after that, we'll talk about, developing characters, right? How do you give a character flaws? How do you give a character conflicts and things that they're going to struggle with throughout your story? We'll talk about plot. So I'll often give the hero's journey as an option for, students to think about how they want to structure their plot and the events that are going to happen. And then also during that prep time, we will figure out a good word count goal for them, right? So like Mariah mentioned, the official NaNoWriMo word count goal when people give themselves the challenge is 50,000 words, but that is, I think, a life-consuming amount. And so I would not put that on students at all. And so instead, I've done this project with 9th graders and 12th graders, and I've found that I set the minimum at around like 8,000 or 9,000, and then the maximum is 50,000. And I've had a few students do 50, and they were prepared and they did it. But I think most of my students in 9th grade, they will come in somewhere around 9 to like 12,000. And so anyway, I sort of help them by we do some things where we gauge like how sort of quickly do they write at a normal pace. on top of like how enthusiastic are they about it, right? And we sort of help them judge. And then once we get to November, what it looks like is every period in November basically becomes a writing workshop period. So we'll do a mini lesson for 10, 15 minutes. We'll have a big chunk of the class period to write, and then at the end we'll do some sort of debrief or reflection or check-in. And those mini lessons can be about all kinds of different things. Sometimes one that I teach is about using sensory details. One is about experimenting with paragraph length, because I think a lot of students have not had much fiction writing experience and don't actually realize that you can do a paragraph that's one sentence, right? Or you can do a paragraph that's huge, right? Or anywhere in between. It's sort of your choice depending on what you need to do. We'll talk about writing dialogue. We'll talk about doing flashbacks and flash forwards and sort of non-linearity. And one of the things I really love about doing it in that writing workshop style is that they get to just jump in and do the thing like that day, right? If we just learned about, what is an anaphora, then boom, they can just go in and start doing it in their writing. And so that's one of the things I think feels really rewarding to them. And then after November, we will usually have a couple days of kind of celebration. So we'll do some kind of fun things like designing novel covers. We'll do some public readings, and all kinds of things like that. And so, I think one of the things that I love about doing NaNoWriMo is, our goal as English teachers is to get students to see the writing of others as sort of constructed as series of choices, of wondering about the implications of those choices and how they affect the reader. And I think students get a lot of experience analyzing the choices of others, but not as many experiences to make their own choices and get the experience of making choices about characters and about plot and about setting, all of these kinds of literary things that we teach them to see in other works, but it's a whole new experience when they actually do it for themselves.
What you're talking about is also really a kind of literature education too. So I know that there are folks who say, well, especially you're a high school teacher, well, we have all this stuff we need to do with the novel. You're doing a lot of teaching about literary form and effect and character development and elements of understanding literature. You're doing it in those mini lessons, and then they're applying it in their own writing, but there's a lot of content coverage there.
Yes, I'll even share one of my favorite examples is, let's say we've learned like 3 different skills that week. I will send out a Google form that is like, pick one of the skills we learned, and then copy and paste a section from your novel that shows you doing that skill, and then they write a little bit about it. So for example, one of the mini lessons that I teach is how do you use the setting to create a mood in a scene. And so that's some of the best analytical writing that I've seen students do is, they have to think about, well, what was the mood that I was trying to create? What specific words and images did I use in order to create that mood and that effect for the reader? And I feel like that's a sort of, a pretty common kind of literary analysis prompt that students will do in other people's writing, but I actually saw them, really flourish when it was, when they were the one analyzing their own choices. And I've seen it improve their writing later in the year when we go back and look at other novels.
I had students I taught 7th grade, and I had students who never understood how to do dialogue until they did it in their own novels, or who never who could do it on a worksheet, but didn't really get it until they had to grapple with it in a real way. And I think it really is such a rigorous way to learn these things and be able to apply it in other ways. That's so cool to hear, Sean.
Sean, you mentioned the G word, the grade word. We were talking before, that is a topic that comes up. That's a question I hear a lot. Many of us are working on ways to, quote, ungrade our classrooms, but not everybody can do that in their teaching situation or choose to do that. But people are often challenged to think about how to grade creative work. But you've already opened up one kind of pathway that's not about sort of grade your novel, how good is your novel, but grade something else. And so talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so the way that I've done grading for this project is there are sort of 2 main grades that come along. And so one is a weekly reflection form that I send out. And so I just put this in a Google form, and I'll take whatever the 2 or 3 skills that we learned that week in the mini lessons, right? So maybe it's like something like creating a setting or using the setting to create a mood. And then maybe another one we learned that week was anaphora. And then maybe another one we learned that week was, something else. And so on that Google form, it's like, hey, here are the, 3 different skills we learned this week, pick one of them. And then it will take students to a like special section for that question. And it's been basically copy and paste, somewhere between a paragraph and a page or so of your novel that demonstrates you doing this skill. And then I'll have some questions underneath for them to write about, So for example, the one that I was talking about before, the using the setting to create a mood, the questions underneath are where the grading element comes in, where I'm just looking for them to show some thought, and I'll ask something like, tell me about the mood you're trying to create here. What words did you use? How effective do you think it is? And so anyway, that's one type of grade, is the weekly reflection form. And the other type of grade is the sort of progress form, the progress for NaNoWriMo, right? Because one of the sort of non-English specific skills that we learn in NaNoWriMo is this kind of big project management, time management, right? Working on one piece of writing for a really extended period of time. And so basically the other way that I do grades is about, a quarter of the way through I guess if you just map it onto November, right? Ideally, people should be completing 25% of their novel per week, right? If there's 4 weeks in November. And so anyway, the way that I do the second grade is a progress check. So after the first week, I have what I call like a soft deadline of 25%. There's no grade attached to it, but it's just a check-in of just, hey, where are you at? Are you at, 23%? Like, cool, great, you're doing fine. Are you at, 35%? You're ahead. Are you at 3%? Like, all right, let's talk. Let's figure out how we can adjust and catch up a little bit. And then the hard grade is then the 50% deadline. So that's half of the way through the project. And I scale that as well, right? So if you're at 50% or greater, like 20 out of 20. If you're at 45%, like 19 out of 20. If you're at 40%, 18 out of 20, or something like that. And so anyway, the way that I kind of weight those is I put more weight on the skill piece, right? So I would say the writing reflection forms probably turn out to be about, 70% of the total project grade. And then the sort of 50% check-in and 100% check-in are about 30% of the total grade. And so what I like about that system is I think it, even if students are not like fully, keeping up with the goal, they can still do quite well with, the things that they are writing. And so it's sort of, I like that balance of it and have found it to be successful with students.
Can I ask?
Oh, go ahead.
So sometimes I'll hear from teachers who are like, how could I possibly grade an entire novel? And my answer is always like, do not try to grade their whole novel. Like, that is a massive undertaking. And also, since the whole point of November is to we keep telling them don't worry about how good it is, just get your words out. And then to turn it around and be like, no, I'm going to grade your content in November always feels so wrong to me. I never read all my entire students' novels. I read excerpts, like it sounds like you're doing. Do you read all of them?
No, I don't think it's feasible at all to expect to read all of every student's novel. I think the main experiences that I get are through those excerpts that they share each week, and then also through the sort of conferences that we'll do where I'm just sort of helping them, if they're stuck on something. But yeah, I think that's definitely a really big takeaway is the expectation for teachers is, you do not have to read every full novel and grade every full novel. That I think would be a insurmountable task.
Well, and in addition, I just wanted to go back. You've said it a couple of times, both of you, in terms of the philosophy. I was noticing, Sean, while you were talking, Mariah was like, yes, yes, yes. You were nodding along with it. That there are many teachers for completely right reasons that worry about sort of the obsession that young people have with how long it has to be. Often, we'll say we want an essay. Well, is that how many words in the essay? Is it 1 page? Is it 2 page? And we want them to just write. So there's sometimes this kind of automatic reaction about quantity over quality. But there's actually a philosophy in NaNoWriMo that starts with, well, first off, the quantity is insane. So it's not like the difference between 1 page and 2 page. It's an insane quantity. And that insanity is to let something loose. Would either of you want to kind of talk about that? Because it is an unusual thing to boldly say, I think, Mariah, you did a little earlier, because we really want quantity over quality, but there's a thought behind that. Would you talk about that a little bit?
So I'm also a writer, right? A lot of people who work at NaNoWriMo are writers. So I'm working on a novel. I know a lot of people who are working on novels, like real authors, like we talk to a lot of real authors, by which I mean like they've got published work. This is what they do for a living. This is how they write. Like an author cannot sit down at their desk and say, I'm going to write the perfect novel right now, or they would literally write nothing. So what they do is they give themselves permission to like write as much as they need to write to burst through all of the bad stuff, and then end up with a first draft that's like, I've never seen an author's first draft, and I never will, because it's like, it's not going to be good. It's going to be so rocky. And it's only through the process of letting yourself write badly that you can learn to write well. And then once you have that bad writing, you can spend as much time as you need rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. And that's like an authentic writing process versus trying to get it right the first time. Like, that's just not how writers work. So I love this project because it is about writing writing in the way that authors write.
Yeah, I think that is definitely the philosophy of NaNoWriMo. Is the first draft is not expected to be good. It won't be good. It is expected to be bad. You have succeeded if you wrote a bad book. And because the good books come out in revision, right? And some teachers, so I have not sort of extensively done revision work, but one teacher who I will mention her resources later is Laura Bradley, who also is a Bay Area teacher, and she has a lot of online resources that I'm going to highly recommend later. She does some revision work like with students months later after they've had some time to step away from it. And so that's also an option on the table. But yeah, I would totally agree. There's an analogy. I don't even remember where I came across this, but I share it with students every year. It's some weird screenshot of like a blog post that I took or something, and I share it with students. But basically, it describes this analogy of a pottery class, and the professor divides the class into 2 groups. One group is graded on the amount of pottery they create. So if you make 40 pounds of pottery by the end of class, or by the end of the semester, you will get an A. If you make 30 pounds of pottery, you'll get a B, etc. The other group is only allowed to make 1 pot, and it has to be perfect. And those 2 groups at the end of the semester, you can imagine who created the better work, right? The group that made 40 pounds of pottery, there were plenty of throwaways, but they learned along the way. They got better, and some of their final pieces of pottery were probably some of the best. The group that was only allowed to make 1 pot and it had to be perfect, they never made anything because they were afraid of doing it wrong. And so I think that I share that analogy with my students every year as part of the philosophy of NaNoWriMo. Is we're making the pounds of pottery, like we're just putting the words out. And you write a chapter and you're like, oh, that wasn't that great. Okay, keep going. You write another chapter and you're like, yeah, that was all right. You write another chapter and you're like, that was not that good. And you write another chapter and you're like, oh, I actually like that moment in there. And then you write another, and you get better as you go.
I want to ask you, Sean, to talk a little bit about, do you actually see this working online? Part of what I was arguing at the beginning of this episode was actually, if you haven't done it, this is something you could jump into in remote or hybrid instruction. Can you see that working? And are you going to end up doing it in whatever situation you have this year?
Yes, I think it can certainly work online. My school is fully online right now. And, we just finished our first prep week of putting ideas together. And so my students today are working on submitting their premises to me for their novels. And so anyway, I think it can totally work. I imagine many National Writing Project people are familiar with a workshop model of English class. And I think this is very much the same thing, right? It's doing a mini lesson. It is, conferencing with students and, debriefing at the end. And so I think this is, very much going to be the similar experience just on Zoom, right? Or on these video conferencing platforms where I'm going to do a little 10 to 15 minute mini lesson on an idea. Students are going to, go write. I'm going to, do one-on-one meetings with students, and then we'll debrief at the end. I think there's, of course, I think there's something really special about doing it in person and the sort of what it feels like to be in a room full of people all working on their writing. I think it's a very exciting energy, but I think, we're going to try our best to translate that into this sort of digital space. But yeah, it's totally doable in that online format.
Well, maybe we've convinced some people. And so I'm wondering, and Mariah, you said you also did NaNoWriMo with your middle school students. And Sean, you're a high school teacher. So we have kind of a great spectrum here for advice. So I want you to picture these people. They're like, okay, I might jump into this thing. If you were to say, what advice would you give them, first timers, or even people who have tried it a bit and they'd love some advice? What advice would you give them, or what pitfalls did you go through? What would you say? Mariah, let's start with you. What would you say?
So one, I think that there's this idea that if you're going to do this, you have to spend like every minute in November writing, or you have to spend like all this time in October getting ready. And I guess one thing that I would say is that it really is a project that fits into your schedule and your structures that you already have in place. Like Sean, you mentioned writer's workshop. So many teachers are already doing that. And so when you think about NaNoWriMo, it doesn't have to be like, I have to change everything I'm doing to do this special thing. It can really fit into like your normal structures. So if you have October and all of November to devote to this, like great, do it. But I also know teachers, like I didn't have that time when I was a middle school teacher. I taught history as well, so I had to do both. And so I just set the goals. I set my students' goals based on the idea that they would only be writing with me, and they would not be writing for all of November. They would be writing for like 15 days that I could, find time within November to do it. So maybe they didn't write quite as much as someone who would be writing all of, all those 30 days, but the project was still super meaningful for them, and I made it work within my structure and my other, like the other things that I had to do during the day. So that's one thing I would say.
Sean, what's your best advice for somebody trying this for the first time?
I think an important piece of advice is that when I introduce NaNoWriMo to my students, I think that like 20% of them are like super jazzed immediately. They're like, yes, let's do it. And they're so excited. And then I think I have probably, a middle, whatever, 50 or 60% of my students who are like, okay, we'll see. And then I think there's, 10 or 20% of students who are like, what are you talking about? I have to write a novel. And I think an important part of introducing this project to students is acknowledging and accepting and validating those feelings wherever they are on the spectrum. And, because I think it can look like a really big, intimidating project on the surface. And so I think just acknowledging that, like, hey, this is going to be a really big adventure. I'm going to help you along the way. I'm not just going to, push you into the deep end and tell you to go write a novel. I think I have found that just emotionally preparing students for like, hey, like this is going to be really cool. It's going to be a big challenge. Like if you're feeling a little bit intimidated by that, that's totally okay. We're going to work on this together. And I think I have found a lot of success with that, where just in some like surveys that I've done with my students, one that I did a few years ago, I asked them if this was a worthwhile project that they would, recommend doing again with students next year. And out of the like 70 respondents I got, a 97% response of like, yes, like very good, like do it again with students. And so I think if we imagine any of the projects that we do with our kids, I don't know if many of them will get a 97% like would do it again, very worthwhile experience rating. So anyway, just to summarize, I think that acknowledging the students' emotional reaction to how they might react when they find out that they're going to be writing a novel.
I think one problem that I had, and I don't know, Sean, maybe this doesn't happen with high schoolers, but with a lot of my middle schoolers, they were very used to planning like shorter things, like beginning, middle, end. And so when we do, like, I remember I was like, bright-eyed, like, I'm gonna try this project. And we planned out like the little plot roller coaster, which is one plot structure. And they were like, okay, I got my beginning, I got my inciting incident, I have my climax, I have my resolution. And I was like, yes, it's gonna be great. And then some kids, not everybody, but some kids would start and they have like, several sentences for the beginning, several sentences for the inciting incident, several sentences for the climax. And they're like, I'm done. And I was like, oh no, because it's much harder to like then go back and get them to pull out those moments than it is to get them to kind of have the moments in the beginning. So something that I took away the next time I did it was making sure that their plan was like much more robust going into it, and just clarifying like this is going to be just having much more of a plot built out. And not all authors work like that, but I do think it kind of works better for in the middle school classroom. Yeah.
Well, actually, this is a great segue into some of what I hope we could talk about as we wrap up, because in a way, both of you are talking about the benefits for young people of planning and executing a longer term project, planning and executing something that's intimidating or daunting at the beginning. You're not really sure you could do it, and then you do it and you get that kind of rush that you've accomplished something. And so this project management thing, in a way, hides behind some of your comments, and it's some of the great resources actually that both NaNoWriMo makes available, but then also that Nano teachers have shared with each other. So I'm wondering, you had mentioned, Sean, you had mentioned Laura Bradley and some of the resources she had. Do you want to talk more about that?
Yes, I have to give huge credit to Laura Bradley and all of her online resources, because they were absolutely necessary in my planning and execution of this project the first time that I did it. And so I imagine there will be some show notes, but
we will be putting all of these links. Yes.
Yeah. So I really like, she has sort of two places I would recommend checking out. So one is the nanoteacher.org is her website, where she has a lot of resources that helped me think about the day-to-day, and think about the structures, and think about the grading, and think, it really helped me take this sort of idea that I was excited about and then figure out how I might concretely execute that with students. And so I super, super recommend that. She also did some writing for Edutopia about sort of how to do NaNoWriMo. And so through the combination of both of those things, I think those are like super, super helpful. Also, you'll find some of my resources on there too. I've shared a few of the mini lessons I've done on like sensory details and using memories and flashbacks. And so she has uploaded some of those as well. And then I think I'll pass it to Mariah too, but I would also have to say that the Young Writers Program resources are super helpful as well. I used, they have like a sort of workbook of, activities to help you brainstorm ideas and develop characters. And so I use a lot of those too, but I'll pass it to you, Mariah, to talk about this.
Mariah, yeah.
So yes, we have a lot of resources on NaNoWriMo, on the Young Writers Program. The workbooks are really great. About 2/3 of our participants are in middle school age. So the middle school workbook has been revised about 1.5 years ago. So it's up to date with some activities that the other workbooks don't have, but will soon, hopefully. We also have done, in our adult program, we approach our adult participants as like kind of beginners as well, because a lot of people have never written a novel before. So we have some really great resources that we developed for the adult program that I think I'll link to below. Like we have a Nano Prep 101 workshop that has just like offers a lot more support. So I mentioned the plot roller coaster. That's what you'll find in the workbook. But if you want to look, we also have like the hero's journey and save the cat and like a bunch of other structures to use for plotting in these other places that I'm glad to share. As for just like how to plan to take on this huge project, I mean, one, I think being realistic about what you're going to get from kid, like not every kid is going to write a 50,000 word novel, and that's totally okay. That's everyone's working at their own level. And two, I think letting them like go through, if you've never done this project as a teacher, like pick another month that's not November, like pick a summer month and try to write a novel in a month. Like I very much encourage you to do it, because when I did it, it changed the way I think about writing, it changed how I think about teaching, and it changed how I think about reading. So it's really meaningful. And you also like let your kids go through the ups and downs, because that's what it's actually like to, you know, to write a novel, and you're kind of there as their cheerleader.
Yeah, and actually the notion that if you can't do it now, and I think right now there are many teachers who are sort of like just making it through the week at this particular time. It's a very hard time. So it may also be that you decide you can't do it right now, but you can do the same thing next June if you would like to. Or so I love that idea, Mariah. Just, you know, pick a month and try it and go through the process.
And honestly, say you can NaNoWriMo, like the big bang, like bells and whistles, is happening in November. But on the Young Writers Program website, we also have an event in, oh my God, April, and also one in July that mimics NaNoWriMo. And also teachers, if you create a classroom, you can create a classroom challenge, which will mimic NaNoWriMo. But like if you want to hold your own NaNoWriMo event in May, like you could do it.
Well, to wrap this up, Mariah, would you take us all the way back to the beginning?
Yes.
And, you know, now that we've heard this, we want to get involved. We want to sign up. Walk us through what we should do now.
Sure. Should I share my screen again?
Yeah, why not?
Okay. So what you can do is you can visit, and we'll have this in the show notes, ywp.nanowrimo.org to sign up. So it's super easy to sign up. You'll sign up as an educator. You're an adult leading young writers. And once you sign up, I'll sign in and show you. Once you sign up, you'll see your dashboard won't look exactly like mine. I have a lot going on, but you'll see all of the tools that I mentioned. It can be a little overwhelming at first. I, you know, just advise you to poke around. It's not actually that complicated. You can create your own novel. You can create your own classroom. So I have my Nano Novelist, but you can, when that's not here, you'll see a prompt to create a classroom. You can create your own classroom. You can mess around with it as much as you want. To sign up your students, I'm going to sign out. They'll sign up, same page, but they'll sign up as young writers. And just to confirm, I'm going to pick a random date. If you're over 18, we ask that you go to the other NaNoWriMo site. So this is a cool thing. So when you sign up and you create a classroom, you'll see a classroom code on the admin page. And we have lots of instructions for this, so you don't have to remember exactly what I'm saying. If you give that code to your students and they sign up using that code, I'll say yes, join that classroom. Then they don't need to put this parent guardian email address or their own email address. It's not super obvious, that's why I'm telling you now. But this is optional. It is optional if you're joining with the classroom. So I know that can be like, sometimes schools have like spam blockers or whatever. So they don't even need an email if they're signing up with your classroom code. And then they'll automatically get joined into your class when they log in, and they can start their novels there. Yeah, YWP, NaNoWriMo.org. We're excited to have you. I do think that it's a really great tool, whether or not your students are in person. And I'm excited. It's so soon.
We are almost there. We're almost there. Yes. So thank you both. I think that probably there are some people who are going to be interested in this. And so thank you for all this help to give them. Viewers, if you are one of those folk who are now interested, we'll include all these links. They're great resources. And there's actually really a pretty strong community of teachers that do NaNoWriMo. So it's an opportunity to see how it's been adapted in a whole bunch of other classrooms. And of course, NaNoWriMo will be here. If this is not the year for you, it will be here more time during the year in the summer, and it'll be back next year as well. Sean and Mariah, thank you so much for helping people get started with NaNoWriMo. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it was fun to talk.
You're listening to
Bye-bye.
NWP Radio, a production of the National Writing Project.
NWP. NWP Radio.